Good morning, everyone. How is everybody doing today? Mr. and Mrs. A are happy to be with you once again. It's British Lit 2020, 2021, and this is the Center for Lit online class machine, continuing to roll forward into knowledge and wisdom. Yea, verily.
Wow, those are some epic addresses.
That's a bit of a rough start, actually. It's normally smoother than that. Maybe can we start over, Mrs. A?
Epic, yeah.
Hi, guys. Welcome, Mr. A here, along with my trusty sidekick who's smarter than all of us, Mrs. A.
No, I don't think so. We've got some pretty smart kids out there.
Including Noah, who finished Paradise Lost half an hour ago. At a kid, Noah.
Yay, Noah.
That's what I like to see. It's good to have everybody. We're going to have a great time discussing Paradise Lost today. Let me just remind you of the administrative details, and then we'll get right into it. It's, as you know, Noah and everyone knows, Paradise Lost is a big, long one. So it'll take us the full 2 hours probably to give it the kind of cursory treatment we're shooting for. So let me just really quickly go through the administrative details. First of all, if you're making a comment in the chat box, don't forget to address your comments to, quote, all attendees and panelists so that everyone can see your comments. You'll be making a comment and then there'll be just crickets in response. And it's because only Mrs. A and I can see it and we're thinking of other things. So don't forget to tell your friends exactly what you are thinking. Secondly, I'll be making a recording of the class, video and audio together, along with a PDF version of the notes that we take together. Put those in the Google Classroom, like we always do, along with the first of 2 discussion post assignments. So watch for that recording if you would like to take the class again, or if you have to leave early or get sick or something like that. And then don't forget, you have a week to respond to the discussion post, and then we'll do another one of those 1 week from today. So we'll keep our discussion of Paradise Lost going in the Google Classroom. And I hope that there will be a lot of stuff for us to talk about. This is one of the great works of English literature by any measure, if you ask anyone, right up there with all the works of Shakespeare in terms of its grandeur, in terms of its epic quality and scope, in terms of its masterful use of the English language. John Milton was one of the heavy hitters in our own particular literary tradition. And so it's a pleasure to introduce this book to you today. So Mrs. A, I'm going to turn it over to you in terms of the structure of our class and the direction that we go with our discussion. But I just wanted to get my 2 cents in first. I am very proud that Paradise Lost is on our list.
Okay, well, that's awesome.
Yeah, she says, that's very well. Not relevant, but interesting.
Okay, where I want to start today is with a little context, a little biographical information about John Milton. He was born in 1608 and lived till 1674, and he was British. And I don't know if many of you know your British history, but that makes him a 17th century Englishman, and his life and works are very marked by the history that surrounded him, the history of his time, which was a time of revolution and religious fervor. And in fact, those 2 things, revolution and religion, came together in an attempt at an English theonomy. This was under the Protestant Roundhead leader Oliver Cromwell. Ringing any bells? Milton was a stalwart Protestant himself and a Cromwell supporter, and that served him very well under the Protectorate, as you might imagine, but left him in a lot of danger when Charles, the rightful king of the time, was restored to the throne. As a matter of fact, if his good friend and co-worker in the Latin office where he was appointed hadn't pleaded his case for him, he might have lost his life for his politics, and then we would never have known Paradise Lost. Milton was a Christian humanist, and let's talk about what that term means. Humanist. Today, it's got some very negative connotations, right, in religious circles, but that is not the way I'm using the term humanist. When we talk about a humanist, historically speaking, we're talking about somebody who studied the liberal arts, a scholar, right? The humanities. You've heard of the humanities. Maybe somebody goes to a liberal arts school and they study the humanities. Those terms might not mean much to you yet, but they should. And so we're going to talk about what those terms mean right now. Ms. Ray, why do we call the liberal arts liberal?
Well, the liberal arts are so named from the word liberal, which comes from the Latin liber, which means freedom or free.
Mm-hmm.
And so the liberal arts are those studies which are actually has two connotations. Those studies which are appropriate to a free man. You might also think of it as those studies which help to create a free man. And so they're the studies that relate to human freedom. You might think that that means, well, like politics or something. But in the classical version of the term, what it means is those things that make a man in his mind and heart fully human and capable of taking care of himself, if you will. And that's kind of the idea of freedom, the ability to take care of yourself, to realize yourself, to protect yourself, to become fully and completely human. And so the liberal arts actually encompass a lot of things besides just politics: philosophy, theology, literature, history, economics, fine arts, and the like.
So you're saying the liberal arts are those studies, excuse me, that make a man free and keep a man free.
Yeah.
Not only politically, but also intellectually and spiritually. The liberal arts make free men.
Right. And you might also say it the other way around, which is that only free men can really take advantage of them.
Yes, I think that's true. And the humanists thought so too. They pursued these liberal arts, which harken back to the classical Greek scholars who began this quest. And the Christians who engaged in this tradition after them didn't actually toss all the mythological content of their predecessors and their works, but instead you'll find that the Christian scholars synthesized all of their predecessors' mythology into their own works and their own Christian thought. And really, none of these scholars did this as well as John Milton did. Now, I just want to be clear that synthesized doesn't mean polluted here, but instead, Christian humanists understood the classical mind and the mythology that ruled it and brought that mythology to bear in their pursuit, in their understanding of what they would have said is real truth, using what they would have called shadows to explain the real substance, so to speak. Okay. And this is what John Milton was about. That's why you're going to find so many classical allusions. You guys know that word, Allusions?
Means magic tricks.
No, that's illusions with an I, Mr. A. What's an allusion?
My illusions, Mrs. A.
Yeah, ha, ha, ha. What's an allusion? Does anybody know? Has anyone heard that word before? Yes, it's a reference. That's
Good,
right, Noah.
That's right.
A reference to something outside of the text. And it could be a historical reference. It could be a literary reference. So it's just a reference. And why would someone make an allusion?
You guys probably noticed a ton of these in Paradise Lost, right?
They're like on every page.
Referring to classical antiquity, he's referring to myths and legends and heroes of the classical world.
Margaret says maybe to explain something. Yes, maybe to explain something. Usually to import whatever surrounds the reference that they've made, whether it's ideas or circumstances. They're importing by importing a reference into the text. They're bringing with that reference all of the things associated with it, all of the ideas associated with it. Yes, Maya, that's exactly right. It creates kind of an extended metaphor, right?
So if you know the thing that Milton is alluding to, if you're familiar with the myth of Sisyphus or whatever it is, then there's extra meaning and extra depth and extra beauty in his short description, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And with this, I would say that to really understand Milton's Paradise Lost, you have to become a scholar of Bible history and mythology and all of these historical allusions that he makes in his text. Otherwise, they fly right by you and you have no idea what the guy's talking about.
So Noah says, I didn't get 95% of the references Milton makes.
Yeah, because he just frankly had a better education than all of the rest of us. He got a classical education extraordinaire, right? And so if we are going to read him with any kind of understanding, we need to rely on really good editors
Mm.
who have spent their lifetime referencing or creating reference matter for us so that we can understand his allusions in his text.
Mrs. A, I'm sorry to interrupt. You're on a great roll, and this is golden stuff. But Isabel makes a comment a few minutes ago that I don't want to go by so that I can't see it
Please
anymore.
go ahead.
She says, I found a lot of references to Greek and Roman mythology throughout the book, from the Aeneid and the Odyssey. How come there are non-Christian references in a Christian book?
Yeah, that's what I think I flew by that a little fast, but that's what I was trying to say, that the humanists were actually pursuing the liberal arts after the classical Greek scholars. That is, they were looking at classical Greek education and gleaning from it and pursuing the same kind of liberal arts, the same kind of subject matter that their predecessors had. And instead of saying, oh, well, those classical Greek scholars were pagan philosophers, pagan scholars, so let's dump all that they did and start over, they said, look at this rich heritage that they've given us. I bet we could make use of some of those myths, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of those things that were particular to classical Greek scholarship, and use those as allusions that would kind of fill out our work, place it in a long tradition, and simultaneously in making references to these myths, we can kind of co-opt them so as to broaden the metaphors, that is, use them as kind of metaphors, right? Broaden our own expression of ideas and principles in our work within the tradition that we're functioning. Now, Milton was actually functioning very specifically, not just in the liberal arts tradition, but in the epic tradition.
Yes.
And you guys remember the classic Greek and Roman epics, right? We've got Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad, and we've got Virgil's Aeneid.
Mm-hmm.
And Milton is very self-consciously determining that he will write the English epic. And boy, does he ever, right? So all of those classical allusions are very intentional on his part and very appropriate because they're genre specific. And when he makes those mythological references, the people reading his work who also got a classical education would say, ah, yes, the myth of Sisyphus, or ah, yes, whatever, you know, they would know that myth and they would understand immediately the thematic connotations associated with the myth. And that would then fill out whatever Milton was trying to communicate with his readers thematically as well. You see?
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question? Okay. All right. Where were we, Miss Ray? Let's see. Back to Milton. Okay. So Milton's writing career progressed in some stages here. In his boyhood, he loved to write lyric poetry. He wrote a work called L'Allegro and another one called Il Pensiero. If you ever go to college and you study Milton deeply, you'll read those poems. He really got a reputation when he wrote a piece called Lycidas, which was a kind of an elegy, a eulogy almost, to one of his dear friends who died in college. Coming back to school, he was drowned in a shipwreck. And that piece kind of gave him a real reputation. He wrote a lot of famous sonnets as well. Maybe you guys have read When I Consider. That is the sonnet he wrote about his blindness. It's sometimes referred to as On His Blindness. Let's see, he wrote, well, we can't go into all that he wrote because the class just isn't too long to cover the whole life of Milton.
I sense a rabbit trail coming up here.
I did too. You see how I stopped myself?
Yeah.
If you enjoy John Milton, go explore some of his poetry because it's very rewarding. Okay. In addition to the poems that he wrote a lot of political tracts. I mentioned earlier in our conversation here that he was very involved politically speaking. He wrote tracts during this time period, like of Reformation teaching church discipline in England in 1641, or of prelatical episcopacy and the reason of church government urged against prelacy. And I could go on, but I'm sure that would bore you to tears. And probably you've gone click and you stopped listening. Why do I care? Why do I mention these things, Mr. A?
That's a great question.
Can you imagine? Why would I mention these things?
Just to fill out our picture of Milton, the humanist, the man of letters, to locate him in a particular historical period.
Well, yes, and also to kind of tip his hand to reveal the things that were most important to him. Because when we get a well-rounded perspective of who a man was and what he spent his life work doing, we can better understand the works that he wrote. Right?
Mm-hmm.
He was so deeply involved in the work of the Protectorate, deeply committed. What I'm trying to say is that this guy was a worldview Christian. He was evangelical in his tone, but also really very committed to seeing the truths of Christianity established in real time in the real world. And he was really willing to lose his life in limb to do so if that was necessary. And he almost did, as I mentioned. As a matter of fact, when Charles was reestablished,
Different Charles.
Yeah, different Charles. The rightful king, when Charles was resumed to the throne, he was thrown into prison. He didn't lose his life because Andrew Marvell, another poet, actually another really famous poet who was his secretary in the Latin office, appealed for him. He was pardoned, but he was thrown into prison for a while, maybe just to put him in his proper place. I don't know. But yeah, anyway, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of who Milton was. When Milton was in middle age, he began to lose his eyesight. And as a matter of fact, he lost his eyesight completely before he wrote Paradise Lost. So Paradise Lost was actually composed by dictation. He dictated the work to his daughter and then sold the work for a paltry £10. Think $10. Can you imagine? That's all he made on Paradise Lost. The work itself reflects a lot of the despair he felt at the failed attempts at Protestant government, the Protectorate. But it equally reflects his real hopeful response, his hopeful attitude of a restoration, a restored government, a restored world in some future time. And I think we can talk about that more as we talk about Paradise Lost itself. This is not the only epic that Milton wrote. He followed Paradise Lost with Paradise Regained, and also a work called Samson Agonistes about Samson of the Old Testament. That's also very good. Okay, what about the work itself? Where shall we start, Mr. A?
Well, I think the best place to start is to jump off of a comment you made a minute ago when you referenced the epic tradition, and you talked about the Odyssey and the Iliad and the Aeneid, and you said that Milton was self-consciously participating in that tradition. And it actually is true for literary historians and fans of the Western literary canon. It's actually true that he did succeed in participating in this tradition. In fact, Paradise Lost is considered one of the 5 great epics of Western literature, along with the aforementioned Odyssey, Iliad, and Aeneid, and also including Dante's Divine Comedy. So the fact that this is acknowledged as a great epic poem makes me think maybe we should talk about what that means right now.
Okay, let's go for it.
Well, does anybody know what makes an epic? When we say the epic tradition and we talk about those other 4 poems, the poems of Homer and Virgil and Dante, what exactly is it that we mean? And how does Paradise Lost fit into that tradition? Can you guys mull that over for a minute? Taryn says length and form.
Okay.
More specific, what length? What form? Good, Maya. Long poetry about a heroic adventure.
Long narrative poem of the past.
Okay.
Yes, that's true.
An epic is a long narrative poem.
Okay, so it's long. What else? You said it's a heroic.
It's a heroic adventure. Okay, good.
What do you mean by that?
So maybe it has something to do with the connotations of the word epic in modern English, right? It's larger than life. It's huge. It's grand.
There may be a journey involved. Yes, sometimes there's a journey involved.
The English epic that we're talking about today is indeed written in iambic pentameter, Maya. That's very true. Blank verse, more specifically, right? Unrhymed iambic pentameter. Very good. Although Homer and Virgil and Dante didn't use that. What else is characteristic of an epic? Mrs. A, will you read the first stanza or so of book 1?
Yeah, I'll have to open up to it. You guys keep discussing as I do.
What other things are involved in What other conventions, you might say, go into an epic? Okay, Jordan, good. A lot of times they deal with mortals and the supernatural. Yeah, the relationship between gods and men are very often a topic. Ashley, it's a good question about Homer's and Virgil's poems rhyming in the original language. I don't think they did. I don't know that rhyme was as central to ancient Greek as it is to modern English. Maya says, an invocation of a muse is an epic convention. The epic often begins with a prayer of sorts to the god of artistic inspiration that the poet would be successful in telling his story. Yeah, all the great epics have one of those.
It's called the Invocation to the Muse.
Right? We just said that, the Invocation to the Muse.
I'm going to read it to you right now.
Yeah, Milton has one. That's why I asked Mrs. A to read this first stanza.
Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, with loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse, that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai didst inspire that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed in the beginning how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos. Or if Zion Hill delight thee more, and Siloa's brook that flowed fast by the oracle of God, I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song, that with no middle flight intends to soar above the Aeonian mount, while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. And chiefly thou, O Spirit, that dost prefer before all temples that bright heart and pure, instruct me, for thou knowest. Thou from the first was present, and with mighty wings outspread, dove-like satst brooding on the vast abyss, and made it pregnant. What in me is dark, illumine. What is low, raise and support, that to the height of this great argument I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men.
There it is. The Invocation of the Muse, which, by the way, in the other epics, is not only a prayer to the gods, but also gives away to the reader what the main purpose of the poem is, what the main idea is.
Yeah, it's giving us, in brief, just a little summary of the purposes of the poet, right? The purposes of the poet and the subject matter of the poem. So what does Milton say in his Invocation to the Muse? His purpose is, yeah, it's like a thesis or a microcosm. That's exactly right, Taryn. What is his thesis?
What's he going to do in Paradise Lost? How will he be judged on successful epic poetry?
What's his game here?
Okay, Helen, justify the ways of God to men. And Margaret says, explain the fall of man.
Yeah, he's going to explain it. Why does it need explaining?
Let's think hard here. How that could have happened. Yes, but why does it seem odd that that could have happened? What's the matter with that?
With a good God. Yeah, I think you're onto it there, Margaret.
Why God let it be, Ava, right.
How could a good God who's totally sovereign, right? How could a good and a sovereign God have allowed the fall of man?
Notice
which precipitated what he says is all our woe.
All our woe. But the first thing he says is assert eternal providence. What does that mean? To assert eternal providence.
What's the word providence mean? Mr. A's kind of put it in the notes here for us. He says it's divine purpose and sovereignty. That means that God is in charge of the world and nothing goes down in this world without his attention, his allowing it to transpire, right?
So on the one hand,
God's totally sovereign, right? And on the other hand, the fall of man.
Right, exactly.
And all our woe. This is really the problem of pain and suffering that he's talking about here. How could a good and loving God allow his created beings to suffer so terribly? And this is Milton's game in Paradise Lost. Just a couple things before we leave this invocation to the muse. What muse?
Yeah, that's a good one.
The Greeks were always addressing the muses of the arts, right? Who is it that Milton addresses as
right,
the muse?
Helen, the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, Good.
The Christian muse, you
The
might say.
Christian muse. And when he uses pastoral imagery in this poem, as the Greeks often did in their poetry, there's lots of pastoral images like the shepherds, right? What shepherd is he talking about? Restore us and regain the blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse, that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai did inspire that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed in the beginning how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos. Who's he referring to there? No, not Jesus, not God. Yes,
Moses.
Yes, Corey. Moses, the author of the Pentateuch, of which Genesis is a part, right? He's referring to Moses. So you can kind of see what he's doing here. That kind of goes back to the question that was asked earlier about why does he use all this Greek mythology? What's with all the Greek references and things like that? You see how he's using and working within the tradition of the ancient Greeks, but he's bringing Christian content to bear.
Yeah, exactly.
And within that same genre. Okay. And listen to what he says about this. I thence invoke thy aid, Holy Spirit, he says, right, to my adventurous song that with no middle flight intends to soar above the Aeonian mount, while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. You guys, listen, this is Milton doing what Milton does. This guy, what's he really saying? Put it in common parlance. What's he saying? I am about to do something nobody has ever done before. That's right, folks. No one has ever done this before. I'm going to do things never yet attempted in prose or rhyme, and it's going to be better than all that Greek stuff. That's what he's saying right here. He's kind of tooting his own horn, if you will.
It's a preemptive mic drop.
It is. Mic drop. Okay. So he appeals to the Holy Spirit to inspire him to make his argument. What's he mean by the word argument? Is he going to have a fight? How's he using that word argument? What in me is dark, illumine. What is low, raise and support, that to the height of this great argument, I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men.
Yeah, I think you're right, Claire. That's better. And my his story, the subject, the point, in that line, I think it's a reference to the poem itself, to the height of this great artistic work.
He says it's an argument, though. What's he mean by an argument? Can you define the word? When we use it today, we mean that we're having a fight, but that's not what he meant. Margaret, your hand is up.
Go ahead, Margaret.
I think what he meant by argument was he means to prove his thesis, like we do when we write an essay, to show supports for what he is arguing.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. An argument is a well-researched and well-executed exposition and defense of a thesis. And he gives us his thesis here, and he says, in the rest of my epic, what I'm going to do is support my thesis, which is that God is justified. God was justified, even though he was providential and sovereign. When all of this stuff went down, he was justified in letting history happen the way that it did.
Mm-hmm.
That he wasn't wrong, that he wasn't evil, that he was right. He was in his rights. He was functioning as the good God that we know him to be when the fall went down.
Mm-hmm.
That's his game. So let's see if he can live up to the challenge here that he's set for himself. I want to read just a little more here before we get to putting this on a plot chart, because I do think that the invocation to the muse and the few lines that come after it really do paint the picture, set the scene for everything that comes after. He uses the entire first book really to tune our ear to his larger purposes in the book. So let's just keep reading here for a minute. Say first, for heaven hides nothing from thy view, nor the deep tract of hell. Say first, Holy Spirit, he says, what cause moved our grandparents in that happy state, favored of heaven so highly, to fall off from their Creator and transgress his will for one restraint, lords of the world besides? Who first seduced them to that foul revolt? The infernal serpent. He it was whose guile, stirred up with envy and revenge, deceived the mother of mankind. What time his pride had cast him out from heaven, with all his host of rebel angels, whose aid aspiring to set himself in glory above his peers, he trusted to have equaled the Most High, if he opposed. And with ambitious aim against the throne and monarchy of God, raised impious war in heaven, and battle proud with vain attempt. Him the almighty power hurled headlong, flaming from the ethereal sky, with hideous ruin and combustion down to bottomless perdition, there to dwell in adamantine chains and penal fire, who durst defy the omnipotent to arms. 9 times the space that measures day and night to mortal men, he with his horrid crew lay vanquished, rolling in the fiery gulf, confounded though immortal. But his doom reserved him to more wrath. For now the thought both of lost happiness and lasting pain torments him. Round he throws his baleful eyes that witnessed huge affliction and dismay, mixed with obdurate pride and steadfast hate. At once, as far as angels can, he views the dismal situation waste and wild, a dungeon horrible on all sides round as one great furnace flamed, yet from those flames no light, but rather darkness visible, served only to discover sights of woe, regions of sorrow, doleful shades, where peace and rest can never dwell, hope never comes that comes to all. But torture without end still urges, and a fiery deluge fed with ever-burning sulfur unconsumed. Such place eternal justice had prepared for those rebellious. Here their prison ordained in utter darkness, and their portion set as far removed from God and light of heaven as from the center thrice to the utmost pole. Oh, how unlike the place from whence they fell. There the companions of his fall, o'erwhelmed with floods and whirlwinds of tempestuous fire, he soon discerns, and weltering by his side, one next himself in power and next in crime, long after known in Palestine and named Beelzebub, to whom the arch enemy and thence in heaven called Satan, with bold words, breaking the horrid silence, thus began.
Wow, that's awesome.
So what is the circumstance in scene 1 of our epic? Where do we find ourselves? Where does he place his reader at the beginning of his story? Isabel says, Satan has fallen into hell. Yeah, that's true, but how? I mean, we get a little more than that, right? How has Satan fallen into hell? Why? And what is hell? By pride? Okay, yeah, by pride. His pride, but what did his pride inspire? Okay, good. We get this little background, Kylie, of the battle between Satan and God and what typified that battle. Okay, God banished him. He more than banished him. When you banish someone, you say, you've got to leave. He didn't just tell him he had to leave. He ran him out on a rail. He tossed him out of heaven, and he fell for how many days? 9 times the space that measures day and night to mortal man. He, Satan, with his horrid crew, the other demons, right? The fallen angels, lay vanquished, rolling in the fiery gulf, confounded though immortal. Think about that for a minute. What is his circumstance? He rebelled. He kind of muscled up to the Most High God, and he lost in that little game, right? He was rebellious, and he was thrown out, and he was thrown specifically into a fiery deep, into perdition, a fiery gulf. And he was confounded, yet immortal. What does that mean?
It means that he's never going to stop feeling this eternal.
Yeah, he's immortal.
pain.
He can't die, but there he is in a situation. So he's in living death. right? He's suffering eternally. There he is. What a situation he finds himself in. And it's a really different place than he used to be. That's what they say here, right? Milton says, wow, this isn't like that place that he left. The dismal situation, waste and wild, a dungeon horrible on all sides round, as one great furnace flamed, yet from those flames no light. Imagine that. No light. There's fire all around him, but he removes from that fire the one good thing that fire would give you, which is the ability to see. No, can't see that. The only thing he can see is death all around him.
Helen, great question. Do you think Milton wants us to pity him?
Isn't that interesting? Do you?
Did you feel that way, Helen?
Do you pity him?
Do any of the others of you feel something like pity for Satan here?
No light, but rather darkness visible, served only to discover sights of woe, regions of sorrow, doleful shades where peace and rest can never dwell, hope never comes that comes to all, but torture without end. Still urges and a fiery deluge, fed with ever-burning sulfur, unconsumed, such place eternal justice had prepared for those rebellious. Here their prison ordained in utter darkness, and their portion set, as far removed from God and light of heaven, as from the center thrice to the utmost pole. Oh, how unlike the place from whence they fell. Okay. Well, what do we hear from Satan here? What does Satan and all of his companions propose? What's their attitude in this fallen predicament that they're in? Let's look. Satan to Beelzebub. If thou beest he, but oh, how fallen, how changed from him who in the happy realms of light, clothed with transcendent brightness, didst outshine myriads though bright. If he whom mutual league united thoughts and counsel, equal hope and hazard in the glorious enterprise, by the way, glorious enterprise, what glorious enterprise? This is really interesting because we're getting it from the vantage point of Satan, right? That is the rebellion. That was the glorious enterprise he is talking about, right? Joined with me once, now misery hath joined in equal ruin. Into what pit thou seest, from what height fallen, so much the stronger proved he with his thunder. Who's he? That'd be God, right? Until then, who knew the force of those dire arms? Who knew that God was so strong? Yet not for those, nor what the potent victor in his rage can else inflict, do I repent or change.
I do not repent.
I am unrepentant, he says, though changed in outward luster. That fixed mind and high disdain from sense of injured merit, that with the mightiest raised me to contend, and to the fierce contention brought along innumerable force of spirits, armed that durst dislike his reign, and me preferring his utmost power with adverse power opposed, in dubious battle on the plains of heaven, and shook his throne. What though the field be lost? All is not lost. The unconquerable will and study of revenge, immortal hate and courage never to submit or yield, and what is else not to be overcome, that glory never shall his wrath or might extort from me. To bow and sue for grace with suppliant knee, and deify his power, who from the terror of this arm so late doubted his empire, that were low indeed, that were an ignominy and shame beneath this downfall.
Love it.
What's he saying?
I will never bow the knee.
I will never bow my knee to God, right? And a little further down, we may, with more successful hope, resolve to wage by force or guile eternal war, irreconcilable to our grand foe, who now triumphs, and in the excess of joy, soul reigning, holds the tyranny of heaven. God is a tyrant. This is what he's saying. So spake the apostate angel, though in pain, vaunting loud. So how do we find Satan here rolling on the deep? Suffering, but unrepentant. Does this help you understand heaven, God?
Is it
I retract my pity, Helen says. It's to the point, isn't it? Yeah, he's characterizing Satan here at the beginning. And he's putting him in a position that is most pitiable, but at the same time, showing him to be extremely unrepentant. We see the reason for the fall here in in the heavens, at least. Okay, while he's there, what transpires between himself and Beelzebub, whose name you may recognize from your own reading of the Old Testament, right? And the New. What do they discuss? What do they decide to do in book 1? This is line 155.
Plotting revenge.
Yeah, fallen cherub, to be weak is miserable, doing or suffering. But of this be sure, to do aught good never will be our task, but ever to do ill our sole delight, as being the contrary to his high will whom we resist.
Which where are we there?
This is line 150, or I don't know, maybe 158, 155.
I don't have line numbers on the one I'm showing to the students, so that's okay. Keep going.
To do aught good, to do any good, never will be our task, but ever to do ill, to do wrong, evil, our sole delight, as being because it's contrary to his high will whom we resist. If then his providence out of our evil seek to bring forth good, our labor must be to pervert that end, and out of good still to find means of evil. If God determines that he's going to bring good out of evil, we're going to find some way to bring evil out of good, which oft times may succeed, so as perhaps shall grieve him, if I fail not, and disturb his inmost counsels from their destined aims. So what's he living for at this point in his living death?
To thwart, to work against, to do everything the opposite of what they see God doing.
Yeah. He says maybe we won't win, but maybe we'll at least grieve him. Let's grieve God together, shall we? All right. Does he get specific? How does he plan to do this? If he's regrouping for a second attack, where's that attack going to fall? What's his plan?
People saying on earth, in heaven, they should go to the new world.
Go to the new world.
God's creation.
Yeah. Let's see. So stretched out huge and linked, the archfiend lay chained on the burning lake, nor ever thence had risen or heaved his head, but that the will and high permission of all ruling heaven left him at large to his own dark designs, that with reiterated crimes he might heap on himself damnation, while he sought evil to others, and enraged might see how all his malice served but to bring forth infinite goodness, grace and mercy shown on man by him seduced, but on himself treble confusion, wrath and vengeance poured. Isn't that interesting? So remember, what's his goal? He's told us to reconcile and justify the ways of God to man. How is Milton, the narrator, framing this situation of the counterattack and justifying that God would allow it if he knew that it was going to happen? In these lines I just read.
Read them one more time, Mrs. A.
So stretched out huge and linked, the archfiend lay chained on the burning lake, nor ever thence had risen or heaved his head, but that the will and high permission of all ruling heaven left him at large to his own dark designs, that with reiterated crimes he might heap on himself damnation, while he sought evil to others, and enraged might see how all his malice served but to bring forth infinite goodness, grace and mercy shown on man, by him seduced, but on himself treble confusion, wrath and vengeance poured. What's he suggesting?
He's suggesting that God is sovereign even in Satan's designs because he is heaping vengeance upon himself. But also at the same time, in a way that we don't know yet, bringing forth infinite goodness, grace, and mercy on man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right, Corey. It actually glorifies God. This whole thing's going to glorify God in some way. Mm-hmm. Good.
Okay, let's see here. It's all so good that I don't want to leave out anything, but as I mentioned before, it's an epic. There's just no way that we can do the whole
Western
thing.
literature is
so
also
we're going to have to
good.
condense. All right. This particular work divides up into a few parts here, and maybe we should talk about the parts first. Let's see here. So we've got 12 books.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just do a quick overview of the 12 books with an eye towards putting it on a plot chart.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Before we can really do that, we have to decide who the main character in the story is. That is, who the protagonist is in the story. And you guys, treatises, long theses, people's doctoral dissertations have been written on the question of who the protagonist in this story is. What do you think? Who's the protagonist in this particular story?
Let's think about that question. While you're doing, Noah, the first edition of Paradise Lost had 10 books. Previous edition or subsequent editions divided it up into 12. Content is the same. So we have Satan. I think Satan, since we're following his goal, says Ava. Kylie and Elise jump in on Satan. Margaret is hedging her bets. You could argue for Satan, Adam, or God.
Well, they're certainly the main characters in the story, but can you see that it's really significant to decide whose story we're really reading here?
Theologically speaking, right, his argument is to justify the ways of God. But in terms of telling a story about that, doing a work of literary art to bring that question up, who's the main character? We're reading about the fall, Anna. It's true, Helen. It's the story of the fall of man. But the fall of man has more than one character involved, right? There's at least 4 in this story related to the fall of man. Satan, God the Son, Adam, Eve.
Okay, so far all we've gotten is this whole story coming through the mouth and the eyes of Satan, right? The narrator is narrating how the angels in heaven conspired against God and grouped off, and the rebellious ones fronted him, failed, and were tossed out on their ear. We find them rolling on the fiery deeps, regrouping. And when they do so, they decide that they've not been deterred. Maybe they've been kept from, maybe they've lost the first battle, but they haven't lost their spirit, and their spirit is full of rebellion. They will continue to resist even from the deep. So they're regrouping for a counterattack.
Yeah.
Right?
In fact, the counterattack takes up the first 3 or 4 books of the poem.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Right. They build pandemonium.
Okay, stop. What is pandemonium? I wanted to talk about that for a minute. The first thing that they do when they regroup is they decide we will make a heaven of hell. That is, we will. He hasn't defeated us. He's relegated us to this fiery deep. We'll make of this fiery deep a heaven. That is, hell will be our heaven. It will be our resting place, and we'll make it wonderful. And so he builds pandemonium as sort of a counterpart to heaven. And he says it's better to reign in hell, right, than to serve in heaven. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
Ah, that's awesome.
Right? Okay. And then there in Pandemonium, they devise their plan for their counterattack. And you'll find it in book 2, round about line 345. He says, what if we find some easier enterprise? There is a place, if ancient and prophetic fame in heaven err not, another world, the happy seat of some new race called man, about this time to be created like to us, though less in power and excellence, but favored more of him who rules above. So is his will pronounced among the gods, and by an oath that shook heaven's wide circumference confirmed. There let us bend all our thoughts to learn what creatures there inhabit, of what mold or substance, how endued, and what their power, and where their weakness, how attempted best, by force or subtlety. Though heaven be shut, and heaven's high arbitrator sits secure in his own strength, this place may lie exposed, the utmost border of his kingdom, left to their defense who hold it. Here, perhaps, some advantageous act may be achieved by sudden onset, either with hellfire to waste his whole creation, or possess all as our own, and drive as we were driven the puny habitants. Or if not drive, seduce them to our party, that their God may prove their foe, and with repenting hand abolish his own works. This would surpass common revenge, and interrupt his joy in our confusion, and our joy upraise in his disturbance. when his darling sons, hurled headlong to partake with us, shall curse their frail original and faded bliss, faded so soon.
Advise if this be worth attempting. So he's saying, boss, what do you think of this idea?
What is this idea? This is, by the way, this is Beelzebub proposing this idea. Beelzebub speaking. What's his plan? He says, I heard when I was in heaven that God had this plan to create a new world and a new race called man. How about we go down there and we kind of do a backdoor entry to subvert his goals? That is God's goals, right? How about we corrupt this man that he's going to create, in whom he plans to place his image and that he hopes and loves and all of that sort of thing. And let's subvert them, let's corrupt them. Let's win them to our party and steal his joy. Let's do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We can do it one of two ways. We can either run man out and take his kingdom earth for ourselves, or we can actually make him one of us, right? In our insurrection. And they all think this is a grand idea. Let's do it. Let's do it. But then here comes the line around 402.
But there's a problem.
But first, whom shall we send in search of this new world? Whom shall we find sufficient? Who shall tempt with wandering feet the dark unbottomed infinite abyss, and through the palpable obscure find out his uncouth way, or spread his airy flight upborne with indefatigable wings over the vast abrupt, ere he arrive the happy isle? What strength, what art can then suffice, or what evasion bear him safe through the strict centuries and stations thick of angels watching round? Here he had need all circumspection, and we now no less choice in our suffrage, for on whom we send the weight of all and our last hope relies. This said he, and sat, and expectation held his look suspense, awaiting who appeared to second or oppose or undertake the perilous attempt. Whom shall we send?
But you missed the last part of that sentence. To second or oppose or undertake the perilous attempt, but all sat mute, pondering the danger with deep thoughts.
Who answers the challenge?
Till at last, Satan, whom now transcendent glory raised above his fellows, with monarchal pride, conscious of highest worth, unmoved, thus spake.
And
yeah, right.
What does he say?
What does Satan say? Satan says, me, but what does he mean? Yeah, right, Anna, I will go. Wherefore do I assume these royalties and not refuse to reign, refusing to accept as great a share of hazard as of honor, do alike to him who reigns.
This enterprise none shall partake with me. I'm going to do it all by myself.
I'm going to do it all by myself.
Okay. By the way, send me. This is kind of an echo to the works in Isaiah. Send me, Lord. Whom shall I send? Send me.
I
right?
volunteer.
But it's coming from the mouth of a hellion, right?
Mm-hmm. Just a great twist.
Okay. So I think this sort of is where I wanted to go, because this begins to set up this original epic that Milton is writing, that he says is going to soar above the old epics. Now, in the old epics, we get an epic hero. We get Achilles in the Iliad, or Odysseus in the Odyssey, right? And they're elevated because they're demigods, but also because they attempt things, heroic things. And we see as they suffer throughout trying to reach their object, we see their humanity, right, revealed, right up against their demagoguery, that right up against their godlike attributes. And we see their fatal flaw. Their fatal flaw kind of shines out, and we go, aha, thus man, right? Now
it's an epic convention.
It's a convention,
it
right?
Really is, yeah.
Now we get a new kind of epic hero, and it's kind of an anti-hero, right? Who is the epic hero here? Who's the one attempting some great thing?
A heroic quest.
A heroic quest. It's Satan. Wow. Milton's kind of taking the epic and turning it on its ear, or on its head, right? Everything's upside down here. It's very interesting. So we get Satan as an epic anti-hero, largely. But before you think, wow, is Milton really a Christian? I want you to notice that right from the start, a foil relationship is being set up between Satan and another character in the story. Who might that other character be? Claire's right off the bat. It's Jesus. It's Jesus. Yes, it is Jesus. And we get an echo of this scene that we've just looked at in the heavenlies in book 3. And I just want to zip over there for a minute and take a look at it. Page, let's see, be line 69, I believe, in book 3. Let's see if I'm in the right place.
Let me get there so the students can read along too.
Okay, by the way, did you guys notice another epic convention is that at the beginning of every book, we get a little summary of the book. So book 3, the argument, God sitting on his throne sees Satan flying towards this world, then newly created, shows him to the Son, that's Jesus, right, who sat at his right hand, foretells the success of Satan in perverting mankind, clears his own justice and wisdom from all imputation, having created man free and able enough to have withstood his tempter, yet declares his purpose of grace towards him. In regard, he fell not of his own malice, as did Satan, but by him seduced. The Son of God renders praises to his Father for the manifestation of his gracious purpose towards man. But God again declares that grace cannot be extended towards man without the satisfaction of divine justice. Man has offended the majesty of God by aspiring to Godhead, and therefore with all his progeny, devoted to death, must die, unless someone can be found sufficient to answer for his offense and undergo his punishment. The Son of God freely offers himself as a ransom for man, and the Father accepts him, ordains his incarnation, pronounces his exaltation above all names in heaven and earth, commands all the angels to adore him, and they obey, and hymning to their harps in full choir, celebrate the Father and the Son.
Awesome.
And all this before Satan alights on the new world.
He hasn't even gotten there yet.
Let's look at it. Here it is. Hail, holy light, offspring of heaven's firstborn, or of the eternal co-eternal beam, may I express thee unblamed. Since God is light and never but in unapproached light, dwelt from eternity, dwelt then in thee, bright effluence of bright essence, increate. Or hearest thou rather pure ethereal stream, whose fountain shall tell? Before the sun, before the heavens thou wert, and at the voice of God, as with a mantle didst invest the rising world of waters dark and deep, one from the void and formless infinite. Thee I revisit now with bolder wing, escaped the Stygian pool, though long detained in that obscure sojourn where, while in my flight, through utter and through middle darkness born, with other notes than to the Orphean lyre I sung of chaos and eternal night, taught by the heavenly muse to venture down the dark descent and up to reascend the hard and rare. Thee I revisit safe and feel thy sovereign vital lamp, but thou revisitst not these eyes that roll in vain to find thy piercing ray and find no dawn. So what's he saying? He's talking to the muse again, and he's saying, first I had you inspire me to go down to hell, and I've been there for a while, but now I want to go back to heaven. So he's telling his readers, what? Well, I'm setting a new scene. Now we're not in hell.
Scene 2.
Listening to Satan and Beelzebub talk. Now we're in scene 2. And actually it's book 3, but it's a scene 2 because now the new scene is heaven. And now we're going to listen in on a conversation between the Father and the Son. Okay. So now I want to look at line 69. I'm going to scoot a poot down a bit. All right. Let's see. Oh, maybe I'll start.
You could jump ahead to Jesus's response.
Now hath the Almighty Father from above, from the pure empyrean where he sits, high throned above all heights, bent down his eye, his own works and their works at once to view. That is God sitting up there in heaven, and he's looking down on earth and all the other things that he's created, and he sees it all. About him all the sanctities of heaven stood thick as stars, and from his sight received beatitude past utterance. On his right, the radiant image of his glory sat, his only Son. On earth, he first beheld our 2 first parents, yet the only 2 of mankind in the happy garden place, reaping immortal fruits of joy and love, uninterrupted joy, unrivaled love in blissful solitude. He then surveyed hell and the gulf between, and Satan there, coasting on the wall of heaven on this side night in the dun air sublime, and ready now to stoop with wearied wings and willing feet on the bare outside of this world, that seemed firm land embosomed without firmament, uncertain which in ocean or in air. Him God beholding from his prospect high, wherein past, present, future he beholds, thus to his only son foreseeing spake. So notice the scene that he says, God seeing everything before it happens. He sees man, right? He sees Satan, and he sees it all, past, present, and future. And this is what he says. Only begotten Son, seest thou what rage transports our adversary? Whom no bounds prescribed, no bars of heaven, nor all the chains heaped on him there, nor yet the main abyss wide interrupt can hold. So bent he seems on desperate revenge that shall redound upon his own rebellious head. So what does he say to him? Do you see our enemy there, Satan? Not even the chains of hell could hold him. And he's so bent on revenge, but that revenge is only going to come back on his own head, and he's just going to be more miserable still. That's what he says. And now, through all restraint broke loose, he wings his way, not far off heaven, in the precincts of light, directly towards the new created world, and man there placed with purpose to assay, that is, to try if him by force he can destroy, or worse, by some false guile or lie, pervert, and shall pervert. He sees man is going to fall.
He's going to do it.
He's going to be successful. For man will hearken to his glozing lies and easily transgress the sole command, sole pledge of his obedience. So will fall he and his faithless progeny. Whose fault? Isn't that the thesis?
It is.
Right? Whose fault is this? Whose fault? Whose but his own? Ingrate, he had of me all he could have. I made him just and right, sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. What's he saying here? Well, in theological terms, he's saying I gave him a free will. I gave him reason. Such I created all the ethereal powers and spirits, both them who stood and them who failed. Freely they stood who stood, and fell who fell. Not free, what proof could they have given sincere of true allegiance, constant faith or love, where only what they needs must do appeared, not what they would? What praise could they receive? What pleasure I from such obedience paid, when will and reason also is choice, useless and vain, of freedom both despoiled, made passive both, had served necessity, not me. What's that mean? I gave them free will. They could have chosen one way or another. And why would I have ever made them differently? Because without choice, then it wouldn't be obedience. And obedience is the thing that pleases me, right? Isn't that what he's saying?
Mm-hmm.
They therefore as to right belonged, so were created, nor can justly accuse their maker or their making or their fate, as if predestination overruled their will, disposed by absolute decree or high foreknowledge. They themselves decreed their own revolt, not I. If I foreknew, foreknowledge had no influence on their fault, which had no less proved certain unforeknown. So without least impulse or shadow of fate, or aught by me immutably foreseen, they trespass. Humans are responsible. It's not predetermined, right? It's not predetermined. It's just proclaimed, pre-proclaimed, right?
I love this. I formed them free, and free they must remain till they enthrall themselves.
That's right. I else must change their nature and revoke the high decree, unchangeable, eternal, which ordained their freedom. They themselves ordained their fall. The first sort by their own suggestion fell, self-tempted, self-depraved. That would be the angels, right? That we've already seen in the deep. Man falls deceived by the other first. Man therefore shall find grace, the other none. In mercy and justice both, through heaven and earth, so shall my glory excel. But mercy, first and last, shall brightest shine.
What a great line.
What's he mean? God is declaring his theme. Satan declared his theme. What's his theme?
Rebellion.
Rebellion. Fight to the end, right?
Never give up.
Never give up. And God says, what's it going to be? Nah, mercy.
Mercy.
Mercy, first and last, shall brightest shine. Thus while God spoke, ambrosial fragrance filled all heaven, and so on and so forth, right? And then Jesus responds, oh, Father, gracious was that word which closed thy sovereign sentence, that man should find grace. And he just praises God. Oh, wow. Grace. What a great idea. I love it. Right?
I love it.
Okay. But then we get the next question. How are you going to affect this grace? How are you going to do this thing? Well, look at lines 210 to 237. God says, well, it's definitely a thing. I'm going to have to
There is the thing about justice. Yeah.
Right? There's this thing called justice. Let's see. Where shall I see? Here, we'll start here. Man disobeying, disloyal breaks his fealty and sins against the high supremacy of heaven, affecting Godhead. That is, pretending to be a god. And so losing all, to expiate his treason hath nothing left, but to destruction sacred and devote, he with his whole posterity must die. Die he, or justice must. Basically says, because of what man's done, he's got to die. And if he doesn't die, well, then I'm not just. Unless for him some other able, and as willing, pay the rigid satisfaction, death for death. Say, heavenly powers, where shall we find such love? Which of ye will be mortal to redeem man's mortal crime, and just the unjust to save? Dwells in all heaven charity so dear? What's he saying? Whom shall we send? Right? Whom shall we send? He asked, but all the heavenly choir stood mute. Do you see how this is a total parallel to what we just saw in book 2?
That's right. You guys are seeing it.
There it is. He asked, but all the heavenly choir stood mute, and silence was in heaven. On man's behalf, patron or intercessor, none appeared, much less that durst upon his own head draw the deadly forfeiture and ransom set. Which is what? My life for yours,
Somebody's
right?
Gotta die.
Somebody's got to die. Either man's going to die or somebody's going to die for man. All right. And now without redemption, all mankind must have been lost, adjudged to death and hell by doom severe, had not the Son of God, in whom the fullness dwells of love divine, his dearest mediation thus renewed. And Jesus speaks, Father, thy word is passed. Man shall find grace. You said, man shall find grace. And shall grace not find means that finds her way, the speediest of thy winged messengers, to visit all thy creatures, and to all comes unprevented, unimplored, unsought? That as grace comes, it comes. Won't grace find a way? Happy for man so coming. He her aid can never seek. Once dead in sins and lost, man can't even look for grace because he's dead in his trespasses and sins, he says. Atonement for himself or offering meet, indebted and undone, hath none to bring. He cannot atone for his own sins. Behold me, he says, me for him, life for life I offer. On me let thine anger fall. Account me, man. I for his sake will leave thy bosom, and this glory next to thee freely put off, and for him lastly die well pleased. On me let death wreak all his rage. Under his gloomy power I shall not long lie vanquished. Thou hast given me to possess life in myself forever. By thee I live, though now to death I yield, and am his due all that of me can die, yet that debt paid. Thou wilt not leave me in the loathsome grave his prey, nor suffer my unspotted soul forever with corruption there to dwell. But I shall rise victorious and subdue my vanquisher, spoiled of his vaunted spoil. Death his death's wound shall then receive, and stoop inglorious of his mortal sting, disarmed. Do you hear it? That echo from Paul. Death, where is your sting?
Yeah.
Grave, where is your victory? Right? It's all here. And he's working from the scriptures and putting these words, this dramatization of what must have transpired in the heavenlies. Milton is basically imagining a divine counsel in light of what's going on down there in the darkest, the darkest regions of hell. And he's drawing from the scriptures in order to imagine what must have transpired there, or what could have transpired there. Don't ever forget, though, that this is a dramatization. This is historical fiction at best.
Literature.
It's literature. It's art. It's very interesting that a lot of people, Paradise Lost has been so, what's the word? It's been so affecting. That is, it has fueled the imagination of Christians from the moment it was written until the present day, even Christians that don't and haven't read Milton have been affected by his dramatization of these events.
Right.
And many people, because they've heard these stories that Milton has dramatized, think that they're actually in the scriptures when a lot of them aren't.
Many of them
Many of them
Most
aren't.
of Satan's words in Paradise Lost come out of John Milton's head.
Yeah. This is imaginative literature that draws on theology from the scriptures and Bible verses and stories from the scriptures and history, but simultaneously takes those and creates a story, arranges them imaginatively to do something very intentional, which is to uphold the justice and mercy of God and to show forth his providence, his power, and his mercy, so that man who suffers from the fall can never look up at God and say, you know what? You're really kind of a lousy God. This is all your fault, right? This is his goal. This is evangelical. Can you guys see this? This is evangelical in its purpose. And it's also simultaneously a goal of his to do what Jesus is doing here in saying, look, man is never going to do this. Man is never going to curse you and die. Man is never going to do this thing that the enemy wants him to do. Look, Satan wants us to curse God and die. Satan wants us to spoil God's joy forever. But Jesus is going to fix it. And in grace, he's going to come to us and prevent that from happening, subvert the enemy, and make everything come out in the end to goodness. Remember in book 1, we saw that Satan said, if God's goal is to bring good out of evil, our goal will be always to bring evil out of good. And so we've got these two forces opposing one another that form the backdrop of everything that occurs within the story. And notice we haven't even met Adam and Eve yet. If this is a story about the fall, we've never met the two main characters in the fall of man. That's very interesting. And it makes me ask the question again, who is the protagonist in this story? Who is it?
You've also just described one of the great literary foil relationships of all time.
Absolutely.
We get our Satan picture in books 1 and 2. We get our Jesus foil for Satan in book 3 when he volunteers in a scene very reminiscent of the one down in Pandemonium. If the main literary foil so far is Jesus versus Satan, it sort of brings up the question again, who's the protagonist in this story? Ava says, is there more than one? Well, it is an epic, but who's the protagonist of the Odyssey? I guess it's a question there too. Who's the protagonist of the other epics?
If we had time, and we don't, again, I'm sad to say that we don't, but this is something that you could actually do on your own time if you wanted to, if you were interested in kind of thinking this out more after class. It would be fun to do 2 separate plot charts, or maybe even 3, right? As you're working this out to try to see, well, what is he doing here? Who really is the protagonist of this story? Is it Satan, the first one that we meet? Is his object the one that we follow throughout the course of the story? And if so, is this a comedy or a tragedy? That's interesting. If he's an anti-hero, right? Then what does he want? Well, to subvert God and all of his goals. And so if we follow his plans, we see in the background, in the exposition, the previous attempt on God in heaven, the regrouping effort, and then everything builds to a climactic moment as he volunteers to go to earth and to subvert man. And what would the climax be?
The fall itself,
It would be the fall, right? The climax would be the fall. So does he succeed?
Well, you might say yes, except then there is the whole scene of the eternal hiss in book 10, right?
The book 10, the eternal hiss. So how do we understand that? The fall happens in book 9. He goes back. He thinks triumphant to boast to all of his brothers in arms, if you will, to
And
all
they
the other
cheer.
demons in hell. And they all cheer. And all of a sudden the cheer turns to a hiss, and they all become snakes and they crawl. This is as, you know, as Jesus proclaims judgment and justice. Seated in it is that prophecy, right? That one will come who will what? Crush the serpent's head. And there's this universal hiss that comes out of their mouths, and the judgment, the prophecy foretold of redemption.
So sorry, go ahead, Miss.
Well, then we get the denouement, which is the mediation that Jesus begins, and then Michael's prophecy on all the future outworkings, right? That take us in book 11 through the time of Noah and the flood, and then through 12, the second coming, right? And the redemption of the whole world. And then we get a conclusion with Adam and Eve learning to trust God and to obey and to work the deeds of righteousness and all goodness, even though they're expelled from the gardens to wander on the earth. All right. So that is a charting of the work with Satan as the protagonist and his goals being foiled, right? This happens.
So it's a tragedy.
It's a tragedy in some ways.
If Satan is an anti-protagonist, an anti-hero, then the whole story is an anti-tragedy.
Right. Exactly. All right. What are the other options? Well, we could say that the protagonist in the story is God, and that the antagonist in the story then would be Satan. And what does God want? Well, God wants to foil the devil. He wants to retain the throne. He wants to protect man and redeem man and show man grace and mercy, because grace and mercy, above all else, he loves. And so we get the same exposition, but I would include within it book 3, right? Where we get to see into the heavenlies and hear God's plan. And we see Jesus, the Son, volunteering to save mankind. And then we get all of the efforts of the enemy to subvert man, him whispering and pouring lies into Eve's ear. And then Raphael's conversation with Adam, warning him and giving him the backstory about what happened in heaven with the rebel army. And
that awesome scene of battle.
Oh, wow. I want to look at that too before we move on. But we'd have to put all that in, and then we still get the fall in book 9, and then the climactic moment, which is what? Does it change?
I don't think so.
It's still the universal hiss, because in the universal hiss and in the prophecy, the judgment, right? In book 10, we get that climactic scene where we know that he didn't really win. He didn't really win. Redemption is coming, and it's coming in the form of Christ, right? Even as he makes that prophecy and executes that judgment. And we get all the same fallings out. Do you see this? Those two are foils in relationship with one another. So in a sense, you can see why doctoral dissertations have been written on this question of who the protagonist is in the story. Is it Satan, the anti-hero? Is it Jesus, the hero? But regardless of whom you choose, you see at the center of the action, man. And what is man? We haven't really developed that character. Who's he?
Yeah, we actually don't really get any conversation about that until, Adam and Eve are introduced to us in book 4, but in book 8, we get Adam's sort of backstory recounting his own creation, and kind of get that character as a potential protagonist filled in.
Who is he? And what's man like? How does Milton describe him?
How would you guys summarize that? What is the main issue for Adam and Eve and man by extension? Satan is mastered and ruled by an urge to rebellion. God the Son is mastered and ruled by an urge to self-sacrifice in the pursuit of mercy and grace. What is man mastered and ruled by? Adam wants to know how creation happened and how the world works. He's really motivated by a desire to know, right? Mm. Curiosity, a search for knowledge. What other impulses are strong within him. If it's a passion, right, Margaret? Yes, there are feelings, there are passions. He's really sort of right from the beginning on the cusp between reason and passion as overmastering, overwhelming urges, right? And Eve the same way. Both of them, aren't they? Doesn't Adam get admonished by one of the guardian angels along the way to be careful about the inherent conflict between reason and passion? Yeah, that's right. It's Raphael, Ashley. Good. What does Raphael say to Adam in book 8? Mrs. A, I hope I'm not diverting the conversation here.
Oh, no, it's all right. I'm probably going to wrest it back from you in a minute, but that's okay.
Doesn't Raphael admonish Adam in, I think it's book 8, after he gives his backstory of the war, to be ruled by reason?
Not by passion.
Not by passion.
Line 635 and following.
Mm-hmm. This is an important piece of foreshadowing, isn't it? Because what happens in book 9 on that question during the fall? I mean, you'd have to say that they sort of fail, don't they? To be ruled by reason rather than
fail.
That's right, Noah.
A big
happens
there.
Anyway. Exactly.
In book 4, the attempt is made. Satan actually penetrates the new world, and we get this amazingly ironic picture of him sitting on. This is line. Oh, okay. Let's see. Let's start page 1, line 190, book 4. So clomb this first grand thief into God's fold. So since into his church lewd hirelings climb. Thence up he flew, and on the tree of life, the middle tree and highest there that grew, sat like a cormorant, yet not true life thereby regained, but sat devising death to them that lived. Do you see the irony in that image? We've got death perching in the tree of life.
Beautiful.
Sitting in the tree of life, contemplating death. Yet not true life thereby regained, but sat devising death to them who lived, nor on the virtue thought of that life-giving plant, but only used for prospect, so that he could see far, what well used had been the pledge of immortality. So little knows any, but God alone, to value right the good before him, but perverts best things to worst abuse, or to their meanest use. So there he is, and he gets his first look of the new creation. And how does he describe Adam and Eve?
I'm going to jump to where you are.
Be line 285, book 4.
Book 4.
From this Assyrian garden where the fiend saw undelighted all delight, all kind of living creatures new to sight and strange, two of far nobler shape, erect and tall, godlike erect, with native honor clad in naked majesty, seemed lords of all, and worthy seemed, for in their looks divine the image of their glorious maker shone, truth, wisdom, sanctitude, severe and pure. Severe, but in true filial freedom placed, whence true authority in men. Though both not equal, as their sex not equal seemed, for contemplation he in valor formed, for softness she in sweet attractive grace, he for God only, she for God in him. There it is. His first look at them. How does he respond when he sees them? How does he respond? It's around line 356. Did you notice? This is really telling.
It's beautiful, actually.
If we're trying to figure out, so how does he characterize Adam and Eve? What are they like? That is Milton. How does Milton characterize Adam and Eve? Remember, when he does so by what they look like, what they say, what others say about them. And we're looking here at what Satan, right? He's the one that is going to attempt the rebellion and the subversion of this new creation. That is Adam and Eve and the rest of the world, right? When he first lays eyes on Adam and Eve, when Satan first sees them, what does he think?
Oh, hell. What do mine eyes with grief behold? Into our room of bliss, thus high advanced, creatures of other mold, earthborn perhaps, not spirits, yet to heavenly spirits bright, little inferior. whom my thoughts pursue with wonder, and could love, so lively shines in them divine resemblance, and such grace the hand that formed them on their shape hath poured. Ah, gentle pair, ye little think how nigh your change approaches, when all these delights will vanish and deliver ye to woe.
He could actually pity them, but for his pledge, he says.
Yep, there it is.
Will you read it?
Let's see.
To you, 374, to you whom I could pity thus forlorn, though I unpitied.
League with you I seek, and mutual amity so straight, so close, that I with you must dwell, or you with me henceforth.
My dwelling haply may not please like this fair paradise your sense, yet such accept your Maker's work. He gave it me, which I as freely gave. Hell shall unfold to entertain you to her widest gates, and send forth all her kings. There will be room, not like these narrow limits, to receive your numerous offspring. If no better place, thank him who put me loath to this revenge on you who wrong me not, for him who wronged. If you don't like this place that I'm going to take you to, blame God. That's what he says. And should I at your harmless innocence melt as I do, yet public reason just, honor and empire with revenge enlarged, by conquering this new world compels me now to do what else, though damned, I should abhor.
I don't even want to. You're so beautiful.
You're so beautiful. But I have to do it. Isn't it interesting the way Milton cast Satan as an anti-hero? That is, he has heroic qualities, right? I don't want to do this thing. I could melt at your beauty and your innocence and would, except for this enterprise I've undertaken.
Isabel,
it must be done.
It's exactly what you're saying. When you locate that place in book 9, she says it portrayed Satan as sympathetic. He hesitates before he tempts Eve because she's so fair, and he pauses knowing that he will ruin her. It's exactly right. Milton is creating an epic hero with whom you, even if you don't sympathize, it's in the direction of sympathizing. You understand, you can see his trouble. Mm-hmm.
All right, but we know that though he is moved to pity them, he is set in his mind and heart on revenge, and so he will continue. And he says, "Evil be thou my nonsense be thou my sense. Evil be thou my good."
Is that book 4 also?
Yeah, it's book 4. Let me read it. It's line 280. Too good to misquote.
Yeah.
Isn't it line 2? No, it's line 110 on page 280.
Before he sees them?
Yeah, he says, all hope excluded thus, behold, instead of us, outcast, exiled, his new delight, mankind created, and for him this world. So farewell hope, and with hope farewell fear, farewell remorse. All good to me is lost. Evil, be thou my good. Nonsense, be thou my sense. And that is pretty much a summation of Satan and his ways.
There it is.
According to Milton.
Yep. Good. So farewell hope, and with hope farewell fear.
Okay, so we see him there, and we see his attempt, and Raphael also sees him, and as Mr. Ray has already narrated, visits Adam to warn of the threat in the garden, tells him all the backstory as we mentioned, and
that's, by the way, in Raphael's backstory, that's where we get the spectacular description of the battle in the war in heaven, where that ends in Satan and his henchmen being cast down into the depths.
It might be the most epic description of a battle ever written.
By the way, while you're looking for it, if you want to read a chunk of it, Mrs. A, this allows me the moment to say, do you guys remember back in book 1 where we find Satan rolling on the fiery deep? And we may have been brought to wonder back in book 1 how he got there. And we find out in books 5, 6, and 7, can't remember which, exactly how it happened. Very similar, by the way, to the way that Homer tells us Odysseus's story, or Achilles' story, or Virgil tells us Aeneas's story. That is, in the epic tradition, you begin in the middle of things, in medias res, as the Latins put it, and you go back and get the backstory in flashback. along about book 5 or book 6. Milton follows this convention exactly in Paradise Lost and gives us the war in heaven later on.
So in books 5 and 6, we get a relation of the story of the war in heaven. And book 6 is the one that I think is the most colorful. In book 5, we hear that there was a revolt in heaven and all the angels chose Satan's side except for Abdiel, who alone withstands the accuser. And that is to say that even the angels were perverted by Satan. So this is a really dark and demonic figure. He's incredibly charismatic and really, really dangerous. This is why Raphael's telling this story to Adam, to make him aware of the danger in the garden, to himself and to his new bride, right? He continues to relate this story in which the Messiah triumphs, routing Satan, as we've seen, and all the legions, and they fall into the abyss. And he tells in this section of the war in heaven. And there are just a few things that I wanted to highlight just because they were so colorful. So they among themselves in pleasant vein stood scoffing. That is the demons. They stood scoffing. High in the air in their thoughts beyond all doubt of victory, eternal might to match with their interventions they presumed so easy, and of his thunder made a scorn, and all his host derided. While they stood a while in trouble, but they stood not long. Rage prompted them at length and found them arms against such hellish mischief fit to oppose. Forthwith, behold the excellence, the power which God hath in his mighty angels placed. Their arms away they threw, and to the hills, for earth hath this variety from heaven of pleasures situate in hill and dale. Light as the lightning glimpse they ran, they flew. From their foundations loosening to and fro, they plucked the seated hills with all their load, rocks, waters, woods, and by the shaggy tops uplifting, bore them in their hands. Amazed, be sure, in terror seized the rebel host when coming toward them so dread, they saw the bottom of the mountains upward turned, till on those cursed engines triple row they saw them whelmed, and all their confidence under the weight of mountains buried deep, themselves invaded next, and on their heads main promontories flung, which in the air came shadowing and oppressed whole legions armed. Their armor helped their harm, crushed in and bruised into their substance pent, which wrought them pain implacable, and many a dolorous groan, long struggling underneath ere they could wind out of such prison. Those spirits of purest light, purest at first, now gross by sinning grown.
Good grief, slow down.
That's a really long sentence. What happened? What is he describing here? What kinds of weapons do the angels use against the rebel attackers? Did you pick it up? Did you hear it? Did you see it?
Yeah. That's right.
They pick up mountains and lob them at the enemy and bury them.
So
it's
great.
kind of amazing. He uproots mountains. Also in this chapter, you'll find, those of you who are so inclined to read carefully, will find all kinds of war engines that didn't exist yet when Milton was writing, inventions of war, cannons and things that would come later that had yet to come, all kinds of guns and weapons of attack that were just the product of Milton's fertile imagination. Really cool stuff. I am kind of surprised nobody's ever made a movie of this. Aren't you, Mr.
Oh,
A?
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It would be
I think that
quite
would be
the epic
with
film.
the technology available to movie makers now to present stuff, imaginative stuff in graphic format. I think the War in Heaven from Paradise Lost Book 6 would just be fabulous.
Jesus enters the war on the third day and ends it. Once he comes, he's completely impenetrable and undefeated. He appears in a self-propelling chariot, animate. Onward he came, and 20,000 chariots of God, half on each hand, were seen. He on the wings of cherub rode sublime on the crystalline sky and sapphire throned. Amazing. Okay, anyway, I'll leave you to that yourself and all of its color. But what we're really interested in here is book 9, The Fall. Let's take a look at the actual events of the fall. So book 9. How are we doing for time, Mr. A?
We have 25 minutes.
Oh boy, we're in tight. Book 9. Okay. In book 9, we get the fall. What events shape the fall? Well, first, we've got Satan. How does Satan appear to Eve in book 9? Talk to me about that. as a serpent. Okay. He's shape-shifting in that regard, right?
Not a snake yet, Corey, or at least not the one that runs on the ground.
No, it's a little different, isn't it? How is it different? Look at it's round about line 186 or something like that. In at his mouth the devil entered, and his brutal sense in heart or head, possessing soon inspired with act intelligential. But his sleep disturbed not, waiting close the approach of morn. So what does he do? He finds the serpent and he possesses him. Margaret, your hand is up. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's kind of what attracts Eve's attention first, that the serpent is talking.
Yeah. She's like, what is this? None of the beasts are intelligent and have reason, but you do. How do you have reason? And what does he say to her?
He says it's the fruit of the tree he's eaten, and and so she kind of starts wondering, well, if the beast gets reason, what would I get?
Mm-hmm. What would I get? That's exactly right. And in this way, he perverts her understanding of the situation and causes her to doubt God. What else does he do to woo her to his ends?
Go ahead, Margaret.
He flatters her up one side, down the other.
Yeah, that's a really good word. Flattery, right?
Up one side and down the other.
Up one side and down the other. What does he say? The guileful tempter replied to Eve, Empress of this fair world, resplendent Eve, easy to me it is to tell thee all what thou commandest, and right shouldst be obeyed. Empress of this fair world. It's really interesting, isn't it? It's flattery. Flattery in all of its forms is what he uses. He says, I chanced a goodly tree far distant to behold, loaden with fruit of fairest colors mixed, ruddy and gold. And I ate it. To satisfy the sharp desire I had of tasting those fair apples, I resolved not to defer. And of reason in my inward powers and speech wanted not long, though to this shape retained. It's very interesting. That's what he does. But look what he does next. Thenceforth to speculations higher deep I turned my thoughts, and with capacious mind considered all things visible in heaven or earth or middle, all things fair and good. After I ate this fruit, I could think about all these wonderful things, right? But all that fair and good in thy divine semblance and in thy beauty's heavenly ray united I beheld. No fair to thine equivalent or second, which compelled me thus, though importune perhaps, to come and gaze and worship thee of right declared sovereign of creatures, universal dame. What's he doing here? Not just flattering her, but he's worshiping her. What's he saying? You rule the world, Eve. And how does she reply? Serpent, thy overpraising leaves in doubt the virtue of that fruit in thee first proved. That's a wise beginning. She sees it. She knows he's flattering her. But say, where grows the tree? From hence how far? Where is this tree? And he continues to address her with flattery, continues to call her empress, right? And what else does he add to the flattery that subverts her? Did you notice?
Anybody have an idea?
Is it just flattery?
It's temptation, right? What do you guys think?
Let's look. Serpent, we might have spared our coming hither fruitless to me, though fruit be here to excess, the credit of whose virtue rests with thee, wondrous indeed, if cause of such effects. But of this tree we may not taste nor touch. God so commanded, and left that command sole daughter of his voice. The rest we live law to ourselves. Our reason is our law. So we're free. We're just not supposed to taste of this tree or even touch it. Well, she's kind of adding to the commandments of God, but there it is. To whom the tempter guilefully replied, Indeed? Hath God then said that of the fruit of all these garden trees ye shall not eat? Yet lords declared of all in earth or air? What's he saying here? God's kind of a jerk, isn't he?
Doesn't seem fair.
Wow. To whom thou, Eve, yet sinless, of the fruit of each tree in the garden we may eat, but of the fruit of this fair tree, now it's fair, right? Amidst the garden, God had said, ye shall not eat thereof, nor shall ye touch it, lest ye die. Shouldn't even touch it. She adds that. She scarce had said, though brief, when now more bold the tempter, but with show of zeal and love to man and indignation at his wrong, new part puts on, and as to passion mood, fluctuates, disturbed yet comely, and an act raised, as of some great matter to begin. And what does he say? Queen of the universe, do not believe those rigid threats of death. Ye shall not die. How should ye? By the fruit? It gives you life to knowledge. By the threatener? Look on me. Me who have touched and tasted, yet both live, and life more perfect have attained than fate meant me, by venturing higher than my lot. Shall that be shut to man, which to the beast is open? Or will God incense his ire for such a petty trespass, and not praise rather your dauntless virtue, whom the pain of death denounced, whatever thing death be, deterred not from achieving what might lead to happier life, knowledge of good and evil? Of good, how just? Of evil, if what is evil be real, if evil is even a real thing, he says.
Why not known, since easier shunned?
Yeah, God therefore cannot hurt you and be just. He couldn't both punish you and still be good. Your fear itself of death removes the fear. Why then was this forbid? Why but to awe? Why but to keep ye low and ignorant, his worshippers? He knows that in the day ye eat thereof, your eyes that seem so clear, yet are but dim, shall perfectly be then opened and cleared, and ye shall be as gods, knowing both good and evil as they know. That ye should be as gods, since I as man, internal man, is but proportion meet. I of brute human, ye of human gods. So ye shall die perhaps by putting off human to put on gods, death to be wished, though threatened, which no worse than this can bring. He's using reason and semantics in order to subvert this woman, this first woman. So he's kind of painting God as being in some way arrogant, of being afraid that if they eat of this, then they might be as good as he is, of keeping from them a good. He even suggests here that maybe God will be proud of them if they attempt this thing because it'll show that they're courageous. He says God envies them. Wherein lies the offense that man should thus attain to know? What can your knowledge hurt him or this tree impart against his will if all be his? Or is it envy? And can envy dwell in heavenly breasts? These and many more causes import your need of this fair fruit. Goddess humane. Oh, there it is again. Flattery. Goddess humane. Reach then and freely taste. He ended, and his words replete with guile into her heart too easy entrance won. Fixed on the fruit, she gazed, which to behold might tempt alone, and in her ears the sound yet rung of his persuasive words, impregned with reason, to her seeming and with truth. What happens? What does she do? Well, that's history, right? She takes, she eats, she falls.
But it's Paradise Lost, so first she talks for about 15 minutes.
She does, it's true. But what of Adam? Where's he when all this is going on? By the way, what does she do first when she eats?
It's a beautiful passage. So saying, her rash hand in evil hour, forth reaching to the fruit, she plucked, she eat. Earth felt the wound, and nature from her seat, sighing through all her works, gave signs of woe that all was lost. I love that part.
And then that's kind of the last we see of Satan here in this moment. Back to the thicket slunk the guilty serpent, and well might, for even tent now wholly on her taste, naught else regarded. Such delight till then as seemed in fruit she never tasted, whether true or fancied. Though expectation high of knowledge, nor was Godhead from her thought, or far from her thought. Greedily she engorged without restraint and knew not eating death.
She didn't die.
She didn't know that she was eating her own destruction. Greedily she engorged without restraint and knew not eating death. Satiate at length and heightened as with wine, jocund and boon, thus to herself she pleasingly began. That's the first thing she does after she eats. Are you ready? This is it. Her first words. O sovereign, virtuous, precious of all trees in paradise, of operation blessed to sapience. What is that?
Knowledge.
Wisdom. Hitherto obscured, intamed, and thy fair fruit let hang as to no end created. But henceforth my early care, not without song, each morning and due praise shall tend thee, and the fertile burden ease of thy full branches offered free to all. What's she doing?
Worshiping the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
A plant. The first effect of eating. It's ridiculous. She's worshiping a tree. There it is. And then she begins to think about God.
Oops.
And she says, maybe he didn't see me. Perhaps I am secret. Maybe he doesn't know. And she expresses her new view of God, our great forbidder, safe with all his spies about him.
That sounds a lot like the serpent, doesn't it?
But to Adam, in what sort shall appear? Shall I to him make known as yet my change, and give him to partake full happiness with me? Or rather not, but keep the odds of knowledge in my power without co-partner. Maybe should I share this knowledge with Adam, or should I keep it for myself and be better than him? So to add what wants in female sex, the more to draw his love and render me more equal, and perhaps a thing not undesirable, sometimes superior, for inferior who is free. This may be well, but what if God have seen and death ensue? Then I shall be no more, and Adam, wedded to another Eve, shall live with her enjoying, I extinct, a death to think. Confirmed then I resolve, Adam shall share with me in bliss or woe. So dear I love him, that with him all deaths I could endure, without him live no life. So what's she going to do?
I think it's interesting that her relationship, physical, human relationship with Adam has become her God.
Mm-hmm.
She now worships, instead of God, she worships Adam.
Well, it's interesting too, though, even in that, she calls it love, but is that love?
Right.
It's not.
As Margaret says, yeah.
It's not.
I'd rather him die than
I'd rather
me
him
not have
die
him.
with me than him have another wife.
Right.
So I'm gonna go ahead and wed him to my lot.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so she gives to him that. What about him? Is he deceived?
Well, let's see. First to himself he inward silence broke. O fairest of creation, last and best of all God's works, creature in whom excelled whatever can to fight or thought be found, holy, divine, good, amiable, or sweet. How art thou lost? How on a sudden lost? Defaced, deflowered, and now to death devote. Rather, how hast thou yielded to transgress the strict forbiddance? How to violate the sacred fruit forbidden? Some cursed fraud of enemy hath beguiled thee, yet unknown, and me with thee hath ruined. For with thee certain my resolution is to die.
Oh, that sounds noble, doesn't it?
How can I live without thee? How forego thy sweet converse and love so dearly joined, to live again in these wild woods forlorn? Should God create another Eve, and I another rib afford, yet loss of thee would never from my heart. No, I feel the link of nature draw me, flesh of flesh, bone of my bone thou art, and from thy state mine never shall be parted, bliss or woe.
By the way, all this before she's even asked him to eat of the fruit. Isn't that something?
He's deciding to do it already.
That is he deceived?
No.
No, he sees it. It sounds really heroic, but it's really kind of stupid, right? Flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone thou art, and from thy state mine never shall be parted, bliss or woe.
Margaret, it's exactly right. Despite Raphael's warnings in book 8, he gives into his passion. And not only that, we see that, as Mrs. A has pointed out, he does it before he's eaten of the fruit. He gives into his passion instantly.
Mm-hmm. He doesn't see a solution to the problem. It seemed remediless to him in line 919. He says, but past who can recall or done undo? Not God omnipotent, nor fate. That's interesting. He says, not even God can fix this. Wow. Not a lot of faith there, right? He doesn't realize that God can bring good out of evil. So God shall uncreate, be frustrate, do, undo, and labor lose. Not well conceived of God, who though his power creation could repeat, yet would be loath us to abolish, lest the adversary triumph and say, fickle their state whom God most favors, who can please him long. Me first he ruined, now mankind, whom will he next? matter of scorn not to be given the foe. However, I with thee have fixed my lot, certain to undergo like doom. If death consort with thee, death is to me as life. Well, that sounds a lot like what Satan said. Evil be thou my good. So forcible within my heart, I feel the bond of nature draw me to my own in thee. For what thou art is mine. Our state cannot be severed. We are one flesh. To lose thee were to lose myself. And so what does he do?
The bond of nature that he's describing here is interesting. He's talking about the bond of our flesh, right? Of earthly, not bestial, but certainly physical.
Notice
passion.
this. Around about 996, he scrupled not to eat against his better knowledge, not deceived, but fondly overcome with female charm. Earth trembled from her entrails as again in pangs, and nature gave a second groan. Sky lowered, and muttering thunders, some sad drops, wept at completing of the mortal sin, original, while Adam took no thought, eating his fill, nor Eve to reiterate her former trespass feared, the more to soothe him with her loved society, that now, as with new wine intoxicated both, they swim in mirth, and fancy they feel divinity within them, breeding wings wherewith to scorn the earth. By the way, starting line, let's see, 543, line 1003, notice the first letter of each of those lines gives us an acrostic, W-O-E, woe, which is exactly what's happening. All our woe. It's an echo back of the original invocation to the muse, and all our woe, right? So here's our woe, the actual fall.
Mrs. A?
Yeah.
10 minutes left, and I know you want to talk about the universal hiss.
I do. So, okay, so they eat, and then they're ashamed, and the first thing that happens is a lustful encounter between Adam and Eve, where, as in books, I think it was 5 and 6, we see the innocence of their union. Now that's been perverted, and it continues. Then down comes the Son in book 10 to make his judgment on all that has happened. And what is the judgment that he renders? What does he say? What does he do? Take a
Anybody
look.
Remember? Summarize it for us, Mrs. A.
Okay. Well, he comes back and he delivers a judgment on what's happened. And here's the sentence. First, let's see. First to Eve. Let's see, where do I want to start? Oh, here we go. It's here. The serpent. Okay, so he asks, Adam, what happened? He says, oh, it's the woman you gave me. And she says, oh, it's that serpent. He's the one that deceived me. So Jesus turns to the serpent. The serpent me beguiled, and I did eat, she says. Which when the Lord God heard, without delay to judgment, he proceeded on the accused serpent, though brute, unable to transfer the guilt on him who made him instrument of mischief and polluted from end of his creation. Justly then accursed is vitiated in nature, more to know concerned not man, since he no further knew nor altered his offense. Yet God at last to Satan first in his sin his doom applied, though in mysterious terms judged as them best. And on serpent then his curses let fall. Because thou hast done this, here he is, Satan's punishment. Because thou hast done this, thou art accursed above all cattle, each beast of the field. Upon thy belly groveling thou shalt go, and dust shalt eat all the days of thy life. Between thee and the woman I will put enmity, and between thine and her seed. Her seed shall bruise thy head, thou bruise his heel. So spake the oracle, then verified, when Jesus, son of Mary, second Eve, saw Satan fall like lightning down from heaven, prince of the air, then rising from his grave, spoiled principalities and powers, triumphant in open show, and with ascension bright captivity led captive through the air. All right, so what is he saying here? Two things. He's reiterating the curse and the judgment from the book of Genesis. The first thing he says is, serpent, because you've done this thing, you're going to crawl on your belly all the days of your life. I'm going to put hatred between you and your spawn and then the seed of Adam and Eve, that is their children. And you're going to bruise his heel, but he's going to crush your head. And this was then the first prophetic mention of Jesus. And Milton puts a fine point on that and explains how Jesus crushed the head of the serpent in those lines that I just read to you. Then he turns to Eve and he gives her sentence. Thy sorrow I will greatly multiply by thy conception. Children thou shalt bring in sorrow forth, and to thy husband's will thine shall submit. He over thee shall rule. And then to Adam. On Adam last thus judgment he pronounced, because thou hast hearkened to the voice of thy wife, and eaten of the tree concerning which I charged thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat thereof. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. Thou in sorrow shalt eat thereof all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles it shall bring forth thee unbid, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat thy bread, till thou return unto the ground. For thou out of the ground was taken. Know thy birth. For dust thou art, and shalt to dust return. So judged he man, both judge and savior sent, and the instant stroke of death denounced that day removed far off. Then pitying how they stood before him naked to the air, that now must suffer change, disdained not to begin thenceforth the form of servant to assume, as when he washed his servants' feet. So now, as father of his family, he clad their nakedness with skins of beasts or slain, or as the snake in youthful coat repaid, and thought not much to clothe his enemies, nor he their outward only with the skins of beasts, but inward nakedness much more opprobrious with his robe of righteousness, arraying covered from his father's sight. To him with swift ascent he up returned, into his blissful bosom reassumed, in glory as of old, to him appeased all, though all knowing what had passed with man recounted, mixing with intercession sweet. Okay, so basically all of these are allusions to what Jesus would do in turning from judge to become the friend of man, and to clothe them first with the skins of animals slain, right? The first death marked in all of creation. And that just being symbolic of the way he would clothe their souls by taking on the shape of man, that is the incarnate man. He became the incarnate man, and suffering death, even as he lived a perfect life, to redeem them and to clothe them with righteousness forever. Meanwhile, we hear, ere thus was sinned and judged on earth, within the gates of hell sat sin and death. And we get to hear what's going on there, right? We get this parallel of what's going on in hell as all of this is going on with Adam and Eve. And I want to just flip there and cut to the chase here, since we're at such a late hour. Page 418 in my text, we get a reference to this. Satan is basically glorifying himself, telling about how he's done this thing that he set out to do, and they are victorious. Him by fraud I have seduced from his creator. Him, that is Adam. And the more to increase your wonder with an apple. Ha, right? He thereat offended, worth your laughter, hath given up both his beloved man and all his world, to sin and death a prey, and so to us, without our hazard, labor, or alarm, to range in and to dwell, and over man to rule as over all he should have ruled. True is, me also he hath judged, or rather me not, but the brute serpent in whose shape man I deceived. That which to me belongs is enmity, which he will put between me and mankind.
It's almost like he doesn't get it.
He
judged me and he gave me this thing, but who really cares?
Yeah, I'm to bruise his heel, right? Me and, let's see. I am to bruise his heel, his seed, when is not set, shall bruise my head.
Yeah, whatever that means.
Whatever. A world who would not purchase with a bruise or much more grievous pain. Ye have the account of my performance. What remains, ye gods, but up and enter now into full bliss. So having said, a while he stood, expecting their universal shout and high applause to fill his ear, when contrary he hears on all sides from innumerable tongues a dismal universal hiss, the sound of public scorn. He wondered, but not long had leisure, wondering at himself now more. His visage drawn, he felt to sharpen spare, his arms clung to his ribs, his legs entwining each other, till supplanted, down he fell, a monstrous serpent on his belly prone, reluctant but in vain. A greater power now ruled him, punished in the shape he sinned, according to his doom. He would have spoke, but hiss for hiss returned with forked tongue to forked tongue. For now we're all transformed alike to serpents, all as accessories to his bold riot. Dreadful was the din of hissing through the hall, thick swarming now with complicated monsters, head and tail, scorpion and asp, and so on and so forth, like this tangle of serpents down
awesome.
There. Wow.
So awesome.
Wow. The universal hiss. Okay, and we get finally, God sees and speaks. See with what heat those dogs of heaven advance to waste and havoc yonder world. which I, so fair and good, created, and still kept in that state, had not the folly of man let in these wasteful furies who impute folly to me, so doth the prince of hell and his adherents, that with so much ease I suffer them to enter and possess a place so heavenly and conniving, seem to gratify my scornful enemies, that laugh as if transported with some fit of passion. I to them had quitted all, at random yielded up to their misrule, and know not that I called and drew them thither, my hellhounds, to lick up the draught and filth which man's polluting sin with taint hath shed on what was pure, till crammed and gorged, nigh burst with sucked and glutted offal, at one sling of thy victorious arm, well-pleasing Son, both sin and death and yawning grave at last, through chaos hurled, obstruct the mouth of hell forever, and seal up his ravenous jaws. Then heaven and earth renewed shall be made pure, to sanctity that shall receive no stain. There it is. That's his plan. So you can see Milton is really interesting as he depicts the fall of man. He depicts it not as God's plan B, but as his plan A. Do you see that?
Right.
He makes God responsible for all of these things in his sovereignty, yet man responsible and the devil responsible for the sin, you see. But why did he allow it? Because he had this larger plan that took it all in, right? And it was to show forth his mercy and his grace and his glory, and receive forever man's loyalty and his praise willingly, right? Willingly. Okay, so what's left? Well, books 10, right? Book 10 we just looked at, but books 11 and 12, which really are the denouement and the conclusion, when man comes to really feel what he has done and come to repentance. Eve says, "Oh man, now that we've gotten this judgment, I think we should use birth control. Let's never have a seed, right? If it's going to
kill ourselves.
Let's kill ourselves. Let's kill our progeny. Let's do something so that the terrible curse that we've just received doesn't come to pass." But Adam finally steps into his rightful position as leader in the relationship and says, "That's not what we're going to do, Eve. Didn't you hear that something good's going to come out of this seed? I hear in it a prophecy. Our seed is going to crush his head. Why would we stop from having these children if it's going to crush the head of the enemy? We're going to just throw ourselves on the mercy of God." And he determines in the best, in the last, after Michael reveals his vision of what's to come, he determines this, lines 561 to 572 in book 12. And we'll end with that. "Henceforth I learned that to obey is best, and love with fear the only God, to walk as in his presence, ever to observe his providence, and on him sole depend, merciful over all his works, with good still overcoming evil, and by small accomplishing great things, by things deemed weak, subverting worldly strong, and worldly wise by simply meek, that suffering for truth's sake is fortitude to highest victory, and to the faithful death the gate of life. Taught this by his example, whom I know, and whom I now acknowledge my Redeemer, ever blessed." What is it that Adam has learned here? To obey is best, to walk with God, fearing him and depending only on him. And Michael, the angel to whom he is speaking, sums this up by saying that this is the sum of wisdom. So lines 581 and following. "This having learnt, thou hast attained the sum of wisdom," the angel says. "Hope no higher, though all the stars thou knewest by name. Only add deeds to thy knowledge answerable, add faith, add virtue, patience, temperance, add love, by name to come called charity, the soul of all the rest. Then wilt thou not be loath to leave this paradise, but shall possess a paradise within thee, happier far." All right, and at this point, he's poised on the brink of walking out into the world, and that's how we see him last. Adam and Eve walking out into the greater world, barred from the garden, but they're walking hand in hand. Now, having seen the whole, what kind of themes do you think rise to the surface here in the end? We leave them. The world was all before them, where to choose their place of rest and providence their guide. They, hand in hand with wandering steps and slow, through Eden took their solitary way.
Like right before that part I highlighted was great. Some natural tears they dropped, but wiped them soon.
Because they see what?
Because they
That's
see
the
their
eternal
hope
plan.
of mercy and grace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And their liberator. Their
Yeah.
liberator. So what kinds of themes do we get? Well, he told us from the beginning what we should look for. What are they? What are the themes? God's sovereignty, Mr. A says, in the fall. The sovereignty of God.
Some sort of justification of eternal providence, right?
There's got to be more than that. What is the justification of eternal providence?
Come on, guys. What's the justification of eternal providence?
What are the themes that come out of this? Come on, guys. Yeah, the goodness of God upon me. Let it fall. My life for his. What is that? What is that theme? That good overcomes evil, that God will always love us. Yeah, the love of God for man, his justice coupled with his mercy, and mercy triumphs over all, right? That mercy triumphs over justice. But over judgment, but justice does not fail in the process. God's ability to bring all things together under one head, Christ, that God has the ability to bring good out of evil, even the darkest evil, which is death.
Noah says, no one can outsmart his outsmarting.
That's right. Yeah. So it's a story of grace and redemption. Yeah. Of strength and weakness. Of God's left-handed power. You guys know that term? The left-handed power of God. Usually we think about power as being right-handed, wielded this way, but instead, God went down to go up. That is, he became man. He suffered. He sacrificed himself in order that all could live. The left-handed power of God. Amazing. This is his game. And can you hear in it his evangelical tone?
Well, I think the evangelical tone is really present in the fact that Satan is his protagonist.
I think so too. And tell me why.
Well, because we identify, whether we like it or not, we identify with Satan's plight. Yeah. We see the rebellion against God that's in his heart. We see that in our own hearts. If we're reading with an open mind and following the career of who is obviously the protagonist of the story, we identify with him.
We do. And is it troubling?
It should be.
It ought to be really troubling when you identify with Satan.
It should be. Yeah.
But don't you find yourself buying in to his self-pity and to his contempt for God and his authority?
Yeah, exactly.
Don't you kind of buy into it as you read along? And then you think, oh, I'm buying it. This is terrible.
Exactly right. And then you're led to identify with Adam and Eve in their weakness, in their frailty, in their deception. Mm-hmm. And so it's evangelistic in the sense that the solution that Milton suggests, the solution that this poem provides, you start to wonder, is that available to me? Mm-hmm.
And all very intentional on his part. And remember who he is. And that's why I started with who Milton was. And we're not putting any words in his mouth.
So we've kept you long. We apologize. We like to get done right on time because you guys are busy and have other things to do. But we're going to continue this discussion in the chat box in the Google Classroom as we go along today. I'll put the recording up, as I said, along with the first of 2 discussion posts. But before we adjourn, any final thoughts, Mrs. A?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously I could talk on and on about this. It's very long. It's epic, but this epic class has to come to an end. So we'll leave it for the chat box.
Very good. You guys have been great. Thank you for coming. Like I said, we'll put up the materials in the Google Classroom, so look for them there. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Until that glorious day, my friends, happy reading.
Happy reading.